峰。下面有请主持人马可罗，大家欢迎。Let's welcome the moderator, Kano Maxi.
Welcome back, everybody. Obviously, I'm not Arapata Hakiwai from Te Papa in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Sadly, Arapata was not able to moderate today. You may have heard that in New Zealand we had a large cyclone about 1 month ago, and this had a devastating impact on museums and cultural heritage in the north and the east of the North Island. And Arapata has been called away to help his community with the recovery from the cyclone. So I'm very happy to step in and moderate this final session, which I think will be very interesting and a fitting culmination of our 2 days of discussion about museums, decolonisation and restitution. Today we learned a lot about restitution and repatriation of both human remains and objects. And often in the debates about repatriation and restitution, a lot of time and effort goes into thinking about the history and the theory of repatriation, the academic literature, the legal aspects. In this session, we're going to focus on current professional practice. We're going to look at how repatriation and restitution are carried out in practice in museums and other organisations. So I think this will be a very good session for going from theory and policy to practice. So we're looking at a range of case studies from different countries, and we're going to begin with the People's Republic of China. And it's my great pleasure to introduce the first speaker, Jia Jianshi, who is president of the Longmen Grottoes Research Institute, and he's going to speak to us about the loss, return and convergence of Longmen Grottoes artifact. 欢迎欢迎。
Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, good afternoon. I'm from Longmen Grottoes Research Institute. I'm Shi Jiazhen. I'm really happy to invite you to visit Longmen Grottoes and give us suggestions. I only have 15 minutes, so I noticed that my slide is too long. So I'm not going to read my script. I would like to ask the technician to help me to move the slides and go along with my presentation. So let me talk about the value and positioning of the Longmen Grottoes and the chiseling situation. Longmen Grotto is the only grotto of the royal family, imperial family, that crossed 2 dynasties. So from the North Wei to Tang. So what does it mean? It actually is the highest productivity representation of that time. Why would we need to do the chiseling? Or why would we need to do the build of this grotto? This is for the stability of the authority, of the power of Dan. So they really utilized the money and labor for this project for that time. So it really represents the highest productivity of Dan. For the North Wei dynasty of China, it's actually built up from the minorities. Yungang Grottoes, as you know, is also from the North Wei dynasty. So this authority of Dan is very interesting. So it's the authority built on some beliefs. So they believe that every emperor should be represented by one Buddha. So they try to build up a Buddha for each emperor or each king. and the Buddhas are built tall and grand, and it's really calling for the respect of the people. And then into Luoyang, they try to adapt. So they try to adapt their philosophy of managing the nation for the Han Dynasty. So you can see that the sculptures, the caves of Dan, really emphasize harmony. The first cave is actually a piece by Sha Wendi for his grandmother. And this is called the #1 cave of the world. So here you can see some wonderful, exquisitely beautiful sculptures. The artistic value is extremely high, because at this time, really there's the pursuit of artistic value. I'm going to talk about two worship of Buddhas in my lecture. These two pieces of art are the worship of the Buddhas that are really valuable and well known even in the world. So here you could see the sculpture by Xiao Wudi for his father. In Tang Dynasty, I would say that 60% of the Buddhas of Longmen grottos are actually from Tang and 30% from Northway Dynasty. From my study, I noticed that Tang Dynasty of China isn't the strongest in terms of military or economy, but the strongest in terms of its art and its culture. So here you could see the groups of Buddha sculptures. If you look at it from the art perspective, it is really a representation of the Tang highest productivity in terms of value creation. It's not only an art piece, I would say, because the art piece is built for political purpose, for stabilizing the power. So it is actually utilizing the highest scientific force of Dan to build this project. So in the team that built up this sculpture, you would have top talents of the nation, and it involves people from all disciplines. Wu Zetian Gaozong really want to memorize their ancestors, and therefore they built such project. Some people argue whether one of the statues is a reflection of Wu Zetian. Not exactly so. Part of Wu Zetian. So Wu Zetian is smart in the sense that she manages to put some of her into the statue and mix it with some other people's representation. So this is something that I have learned from my studies of recently. So Wu Zetian is a smart person. If you look at the Lushan Buddha, it's actually mixing in some of the features of Wu Zetian's appearance. We don't know what exactly does Tang Taizhong look like, but at least he's handsome. But Wu Zhetian has mixed in some of her face features. Why? Because she wants to be preparing for when she becomes the quote-unquote king. Some people don't really support this behavior of Wu Zhetian. But really what she does is really to prepare for the future when she becomes the king. She wants to have the stabilized power. I would argue that if we don't have Wu Zhetian, then we wouldn't have the prosperity of the Tang Dynasty. So if you take a look at the masterpieces of Tang Dynasty, I would argue that the value, the artistic value, is really high. Of the last century, around 1910, when the nation was still weak, some of the illegal groups at home and abroad tried to put their hands on these art master or art pieces. So we started to have different kinds of people gathering in this place. They wrote articles about the beauty of such pieces. European countries and Japanese people or have their scholars starting to write about such masterpieces. In the time around 1920s, we really saw the peak of chiseling. According to a survey in 1965 and another survey of this century, we would say that the chiseling of Longmen Grotto totaled about 2,000 sites. Now, according to what we know, about 200 pieces of such cultural relics were damaged. Now, at the national and social level, and the institution level as well, some of the cultural relics have been returned or restituted. But many, due to all kinds of reasons, are still scattered around. So we have lots of extremely beautiful, elegant pieces of artworks from Longmen Grottos scattered around the world. So it's a lot, and also it's beautiful. And we as scholars will have to look at this really honestly. One of the things that we have to do first is to understand the overall situation. So we need to know the whereabouts about these relics. Are they still in good condition? Then we need to do the real work. According to the President Xi's call, we need to really start to do something. The beauty of art should really benefit people around the world because it's the world cultural heritage, and really all people should enjoy its beauty. We have managed to restitute some of the masterpieces.
Well, just like President Duan mentioned, this is actually not a solution. And I think this is also kind of a secondary harm to us. So in the past year, we have come up with an effective method for our work. Namely, we need to have friendly collaboration, and as to the multiple restituted cultural relics, we need to have the aggregation of them, and also we need to have the gathering of them for further exhibition. We need to have friendly collaboration because we have multiple cultural relics that are scattered across the world. So we need to have cross border cross-disciplinary collaborations to facilitate the restitution. And also we need to integrate multiple disciplines and also bring all the stakeholders in with the usage of the high-tech methods. And we also need to have multiple teams involved with different responsibilities to achieve our target. And we also need to have the aggregation of the data. Why do we need to have the digital form for the restitution? And for example, for the Queen worship picture, well, if you have the time, and you can come to the Norman Grotto to check this out. We only have part of this relic left, and we have pieces of it scattered across the world. And also in the US, in a museum, they also have formulated the Queen's worship picture, and also for the King's worship picture and the carving. It was exhibited in another museum in New York, and in the Norman Grotto, we have more than 2,000 pieces of it, and we're not able to recover it. So we need to have the data aggregation and to have the recovery of the original looking, and then to restore the original beauty of those artifacts. And so we need to bring multidisciplinary colleagues. We not only need to have scientists, but also artists. And it takes time for us to collect all these pieces together. And when we pull them together, and we're not able to show its original beauty. So we need to bring the artists to help us out. And in recent years, our working principle has also changed, and we have come up with a new way of doing our work. What does shared results mean? Because the Norman Grotto is international heritage. It has very high artist value. Well, it is in the state of art for the stone sculpture. It is a cluster of numerous sculptures. So we need to share all these artifacts with the whole world to showcase the beauty. So that's what I mean by the shared results. And in recent years, we just began to do our related work, and we still have a long journey to go. So it's my great pleasure to attend today's meeting. I have many takeaways from today's meeting. In addition to that, Norman Grottos has always upheld the principle of being open, friendly, and collaborative. Welcome all those people who are committed to the protection of international cultural heritage to come to Norman Grottos. And welcome all of you to Norman Grottos so that we can share those cultural beauties to the people across the whole world. Of course, we are sure to make some of our own contributions. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you very much.
I've been to the Longman Grottos, and it really is an amazing site, and I'd encourage everyone here to visit the Longman Grottos one day. So it's wonderful to find out about the work you've been doing there in terms of restitution, restoration, conservation. We go now from China to Egypt, and I'd like now to welcome Sharpin Abdegawad, who is the Director General of the Repatriation Antiquities Department in Egypt, and he's going to speak to us about Egyptian efforts to preserve cultural heritage, combat illegal trafficking, in cultural property and recover what was stolen.
Thank you so much for the invitations. Thanks for ICOM Emmerich. Thanks for Shanghai University. Thanks for volunteers, which they attended and they were so patient with us. Thanks for the students and attendant and audience. Thanks for the people they are following up online. Thank you very much for everyone. And I would like to be more light because we know we came after lunch and most of you started to be sleepy. So before we starting, I would like to just make an introduction for about Egyptian experience in the field of repatriation of antiquities. First, we starting to this department in 2002. This is last year we celebrating with only 20 years of working in this department, and we succeeded, I think, to repatriated a good number of antiquities. And as I talked with another people and my colleagues here, it's not our aim to repatriate object from a museum or others. It's the aim of our work. We are looking for information. So it's like a wall of information. So every piece we miss it's a piece of information. So we bring it and put in the wall of information. And also this is the right of our Egyptian people. So this is their heritage, and we have to work to repatriate it back to their own country. First, we have to yeah, okay. First, I'd like to give you like a brief idea about Egyptian antiquities, how it leaves Egypt. We have two ways for Egyptian antiquities to leave Egypt. So legally way and illegally way. And because we have in Egypt, which we call the antiquities law, it dates back to 1983. It stopped everything to be illegally. So before 1983, we have many ways to let antiquities leave Egypt. So by legal way, we have which we call the antiquities trading. In Egypt, it was the trading of antiquities. It was legal, so the people, they can go and buy monuments from Egypt. When we have these shops from Aswan in the south of Egypt till Alexandria. So at that time, most of the collection which appears now in outside of Egypt Museum, it comes from antiquities trade and from other ways. And we have the division. This is the division. We have a law dates back to 1912. This law says that all foreign mission working in Egypt, they take some of monuments with them. They divided which they discovered between Egyptian government and the foreign mission. Like we had for Metropolitan Museum, Louvre, British Museum, so they had some with this law. And also we have the dedication. The law give the right for the ruler of Egypt and the kings and also the president to donate any object to other countries, to president, to the country as a gift and as a donation. I will show you some of our, this is the trading. You can see the shops and all this object it was for sale in Egypt until 1983. This is very important. This is one of the certificates. This is an export license of antiquities. It leaves Egypt. It must any object. Without this certificate, it means that it's illegal left Egypt. And especially this export license, this is for which I will show you for the golden coffin which we repatriated from Metropolitan Museum, because they're using this false export license. And I worked with the American authorities for 2 years to say that it's fake license, and we succeeded to repatriate the main object, which is displayed now in Nemec Museum. And also the division, this is, the law number 14 dates back to 1912. This, it was, I consider it was a bad law what happened in Egypt. In Egypt, we're starting for legislation for Egyptian monuments from 1835. Muhammad Ali, the ruler of Egypt, who is made the first law for to establish the law in Egypt for antiquities, and we had many laws, but the first law, it was 1912. This is what we call division law, and the second one, it dates back to 1951, which is everyone he has to take objects from Egypt. He has the certificates with Egyptian government. So anyone without this certificate, it means it go illegally way. So I will show you some of examples, because most of you, I think, they doesn't know that Egypt, when they started to build the high dam in the south of Egypt, when they built the high dam on the Nile River, most of the countries, they didn't support Egypt at that time. But some countries, they supporting Egypt to build the high dam at that time. And the president of Egypt, Nasser, he donated 3 small temples for 3 countries. One, this Dandur temple, which they can display it now in Metropolitan Museum. You can see it has a good view. And another one to Netherlands, and the third one in Spain. It was donated by Abdel Nasser. This is the second one. But the most important thing I wanted to focus on it. In Egypt, we starting from 2011 till 2013, we had big revolutions. 2 big revolutions happened in Egypt. It has many influence about, especially about antiquities and museums. We had 3 museums they attacked at the time, from 2011 till 2014, and also many sites, which we started now to find all objects which this people they attacked this started to be appeared in the market. We can see this is the Egyptian Museum in 2011 when they have the revolution. You can see the people around the Tahrir Square and enter the museum. But thank God, the Egyptian army, they came and they start to protect, especially the mosque for King Tutankhamun, and they destroyed some pieces, and we succeeded to repatriate 90% of this object. We're still tracking the other pieces of stolen from the Egyptian Museum. Here you can see, first one, you can see how they destroyed it, and here, exactly after 1 year, we succeeded to repatriate them, and we displayed in a good way, like you can see. Malawi Museum, it was like a disaster. Malawi Museum, it's in middle of Egypt, middle Egypt. It's in Minya governorate, and you can see the people at 2013, they entered the museum and take everything and destroyed some of objects. And you can see how can even they go to the documentation of the object, and they started to burn it and destroyed it. But thank God, we repatriated also more than 95% from this object, and I will show you how we display it now. It's in a good way, better than what they destroyed it. In Islamic Museum in 2014, you know, some of ISIS people, they put a bomb in front of the museum and destroyed the facade of the museum, and you can see how they destroyed it. And this takes like with cooperation with many countries, international cooperation. We restored this museum, and I will show you how it looks like now after 1 year also, after we renew it, and we restored all objects too. Also, they didn't only go to the museums, but also go to the sites. So you can see all this thread, all this is, it was attacked by the Saves, and they attacked every places from Aswan till Alexandria. And I will show you details photos. You can see all this is here. Yeah. All this red dots, all this is also the people they attacked. Because, you know, if anyone visited Egypt, you can see it's still old Egypt and new Egypt is built above old Egypt. So around through the Nile River, and it's very close to the area and the desert, so the people, it's easy, they can go and dig, even they can dig under their houses and look for monuments. This is what the only problem we are facing until now, the illicit digging. Here in some sites near Saqqara called Dahshur, you can see how the people, they go and start to dig everywhere to find monuments, and they can smuggle outside of Egypt. Here in Abu Sir al-Malik, this is the most important area. And you know, the golden coffin, it was belonging to this area. They discovered, the people, they discovered in it. And you can see this is the remain of one of the sarcophagus, when they take everything in it and they destroyed it. So you can, here, I will show you only how it was at that time and what we worked very hard to protect everything. Also in Saqqara, I think you heard about Saqqara, its most famous sarcophagus, the most famous cemetery at that time. You can see it's very easy. You can even with your hands to discover tombs. So you can see this is which we call a false door, and this is a tomb. So it's easy, they can find a tomb and they start to smuggle and destroy, and even they cut some pieces and take it outside of Egypt. Also in Aswan, the people working in Aswan, it's called the Qubbat al-Hawa. They discovered 6 tombs, and it was in 2013. But we, after 1 month, we take this 6 tombs from them. I will show you how it looks like. So they discovered these 6 tombs, but you can see this is which they use it, how in the digging, and here they destroyed all elements which we can look for as in real excavation. So for this terminology, I don't like to say, some people to say it's illegal excavation. It's illegal digging, because it's a big difference between digging and excavation. Excavation, it must be with people working with, you know, you recorded everything like that. But this is only looters. They want to find something and take it away. Also, they discovered this sarcophagus, and you can see this is the oven. It's they're using for bread in Egypt. So they take it and they put it in their houses. Of course, we get everything from them. This is how you can see the people, you know, lives around the areas, archaeological area, and they can dig. You can see this is the house, and they start to dig under their houses, and they discover some monuments. So it's according to our privacy, it's not easy for anyone to enter a house and ask it if you are digging or not. So they can bring everything and start to smuggling outside of Egypt. This is the most important problem we are facing now. What Egypt did for that? We're starting, you know, I'm just show you very briefly about what we had the problem. We're starting first, Egypt, it has to work very hard to protect our monuments. The first thing, we start to building with about 36 storerooms in all over Egypt to store everything in it, very secured with cameras and computer, and we start to put everything on computers. And after that, we start to build some walls around areas to protect it from the people to enter this area. We built around Saqqara, around pyramids, around some Luxor temples, and about lots of the sites, the people they can let go in. And also, how can we work to repatriate what we are missing from that? We're starting to build our missing list with all this, and also we're starting to review all the list of the storerooms, the museums, sites, and we start to arrange it for everything like that to start to work to build our claim if we found any missing list. And we have 3 departments working in Egypt for that. We have one department which what any object they find inside Egypt, what we call seized department. So any object inside Egypt, people try to smuggle it, we stop them. And also we have another one for the ports. We have a special unit in 49 ports of Egypt. They are archaeologists and Egyptologists. They are waiting to check if anyone wants to smuggle anything outside of Egypt. And we had our department. This is for what everything appeared in the market, especially in auction halls, websites, and also in museums, seized in our international airports. And so we started that. If I told you how many objects we seized inside Egypt and we stopped to be outside of Egypt, it's a huge number. But I will talk about only we mean repatriation, it's outside from the country, not inside of the country. Here you can see this is auction halls. You know, we are monitoring the most auction halls through all over the world. 24 hours, 7 days a week, we monitoring all this. We know all auction halls, they displayed Egyptian monuments from pre-dynastic till the time of Nasser. And also we are following the website like eBay, Amazon, and etc. And also we had very good network with other people working in some in museums and also in airports, international airports. We have a good people working with us. No. The most important thing, I think most of the countries, they are suffering from it now. It will become the most big problem for antiquities dealers and for smuggling. This is the social media. So it's easy, you can contact auction halls to say this is stolen from Egypt or from China, or from Iraq, whatever. But it's not that easy. You can following Facebook or Instagram or other social media, because you know it's easy when someone displayed an object. When you start to tracking, it's easy they can cancel the account. So it's a big problem. But thank God we succeeded in most of this to repatriated most of objects they displayed, and most of them they displayed fake objects, and also some of them they displayed original object too. So here we are talking about 3 steps. A state of origin, which I'm talking here about Egypt, I'm representing about Egypt, and a state of transit and a state of market. For each one, for each steps, we had some like ideas of how we deal with it. A state of origin about Egypt, I told you how we protect it, how we be aware about all missing objects, to protect the sites, to monitoring everything happen in Egypt. A state of transit, we had starting to do which we call bilateral agreement with some of state of transit to help us when any object go to this country, they can stop before to go to the market country. And for the market country, also we have bilateral agreement with some of them, not all of them, to helping us, because most of the auction halls, they are not belonging for the government, but they are private section. Here, this is the Egyptian antiquities market in the whole world. So most of them, they are in Europe. Thank God they are not in Asia, and United States. So this is the main market of Egyptian antiquities market. So we are working with all of them. I will show you now. We had a bilateral agreement with Switzerland. This is the transit country for Egyptian monument. And also we had with Italy, we had with Spain, We had already with the United States of America. We have with China. We have also with Latin America, where they are suffering like us. And we are working now for bilateral agreement between Egypt and Cyprus and Greece. It's like 3 countries, they will be signed this bilateral agreement. This is the main Egyptian art law I told you about. This is the first law, number 14 of 1912. And the second one, this is which we call division law. And the second one, number 215, this dates back to 1951. And this is the first law which make protection of Egyptian antiquities. And the last law dates back to 1983, which we amended 3 times, in 2010, and also I am proud that I worked with Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities sorry, to amend this law 2 times. Because what we facing and casing we had outside of Egypt. I amended in 2018 and 2020. For some cases, I will let you know when we are talking about. So how the repatriation process which we are using in Egypt, we had a negotiation and diplomatic methods and legal methods, and I will show you a special succeeded for each one of them. And also confiscation in airports and customs, and international conventions and a bilateral agreement. This is what we are using. And also, we had, like I told you, our way for each case. So anyone who want to talk about succeeded for any case for repatriation, each case we take it case by case. So what happened here, it's not like you can use it with another case. So each case you have to deal with separate with another case. Of course, we are working through the main conventions, like UNESCO Convention. This back to 1970, and also Hague Convention Convention for the protection of cultural property in the event of armed conflict. This is the main 2, and I told you the convention dates back to 1995. We didn't sign because we have some concerns in it. This is, you can show you, I told you when I started to work in my department, I have my plan, short plan and long plan. My short plan that I want to make like 3 circles around Egypt to protect antiquities to go outside of Egypt. So the first circle we want to do some bilateral agreement with the countries around Egypt. So we had with Cyprus, with Greece, Italy, and also with Lebanon, with Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and we are working with Sudan and Libya when they became, stable countries. They will sign with them, and after that we make a bigger circle. We started to Switzerland and also with the United States, and the main. The biggest circle, it will be, we want to do bilateral agreement with all African countries, with Asia, with all countries, they are suffering like us. Of course, I forgot to tell you that we are the first country we had this bilateral agreement or memorandum of understanding in Africa and Middle East. We signed it in 2016. And we renew it for 5 years. We renew it last year for another 5 years. This is very important because the United States is the biggest market for Egyptian antiquities. And by this memorandum of understanding, we succeeded to repatriate lots of pieces by memorandum of understanding. So it's very important to international cooperation. I will show you some examples quickly because I don't want to take your time. This is what we started 2002, but we succeeded to repatriate it before 2002. But here, I will show you exactly from my department. In 2002, we succeeded to repatriate this gold sheets from Germany in 2002. It's for the King Akhenaten. I was not working in my department, but I was working in the technical office of Zahi Hawass, and we succeeded to repatriate this royal mummy from Carlos Museum in Atlanta. It was amazing when they bring it back to Egypt and they put it in a car, and they take it like a festival, like a real royal king, to take it to display it in Luxor Museum. And everyone, it was like a celebration when we take it in 2003 and display it now in Luxor Museum. When you will go there, you can find it. I'm sorry. From auction house, I think the people working in this field, they know how it's difficult to repatriate objects from main auction houses like Christie's and Sotheby's and Bonham. So we succeeded in 2014. This 6 object was displayed in auction house of Christie's. It takes time from us, but we succeeded to repatriate it back to Egypt. Also, this is the wooden banner filling stolen from the tomb of Khalifa Abbasid Khalifa in Egypt, in Cairo. This is the place which they are display was there, and it was displayed in auction hall in London, but we succeeded to repatriate it back to Egypt. This is the places which they are were there. This is the most important case I worked with. This is 3 Islamic lamps was stored in Namek Museum, and before we open it, and they stolen, and the people, they put another fake lamps in the same place. But when they start to appear, we worked hard to repatriate it back. So the first one we repatriated from London. It was displayed in auction hall, and these 2 they were displayed. Sorry, we repatriated from United Arab Emirates. This is in 2016. Also, we had a storeroom in Saqqara. It's a unique thing, because this was a storeroom. We collect every piece to display what we choose it to display in Grand Egyptian Museum. And after the war, we started to some of them appeared in the market. So some people, they go to the storeroom and take some pieces, but we succeeded to repatriate this from France. This lady, it's a unique object, and also this is sacred oil, still of sacred 7 oils. We repatriated from Switzerland, and now they are in Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Also, this is, it was stolen from storerooms in Aswan, and this is the middle photo. This is when they discovered. When they go to London, the dealer start to store to let us doesn't recognize that it's the same one. But he was not clever, because the letters of hieroglyphics he was mixing, didn't doing in a good one. So we succeeded to repatriate it from London after he make this restored for and complete this statue. And we had a case now because he destroyed it. This case too. And also this was also from the same storerooms, and we repatriated from France. This is one, it's ivory statue. It was from a storeroom in Aswan, and we repatriated from back to Egypt. Now it's in Egyptian Museum in 2016. This is in a storeroom in Giza. It was stolen there, and we repatriated from Belgium in 2016. This is some pieces which are already in our missing list. I will show you some pieces which are in illicit digging, and also we succeeded to repatriate it back. These 2 wooden sarcophagus, it was discovered in Saqqara in 2002 and was displayed in Israel, but in 2016 we succeeded to repatriate it back to Egypt, and this is the second time to repatriate anything from Israel. We had a temple called Behbit al-Hajar in Delta, and this temple, You know, Delta, it's far from Aswan, but it's all this temple, it's made from red granite. Red granite, it's all in Aswan. It's about more than 1,000 kilometers from Aswan to Delta. But they bring it everything, and they built this temple from red granite. And in 1991, it was destroyed, and they stolen some pieces from it. But we succeeded to repatriate 3 pieces of them, and we still 4 pieces missing. We still working for them. This is a good example of what we had. This is the stela is discovered with Italian mission working in Egypt in 1974. And after they put it in the storeroom in Luxor, when we reviewed this storeroom in 1995, we found it was the 4 pieces, stela, but it was 4 pieces, A, B, C, D. And we discovered that it's missing. And we working hard till we discovered the A, B, and D in Switzerland, and we repatriated back in 2017, and it's still missing C. But we succeeded to repatriate it from Australia, from Macquarie Museum, to complete it, and now it will display in Nemec Museum to be like a story, how they divided in the whole world, but we succeeded to collect it back, and National Geographic International will make like a movie about how the story, how we succeeded to repatriate this stela back to Egypt. This is the 3 parts, and this is the missing one. We bring it from Australia. We signed bilateral agreement or memorandum understanding with United States in 2016. And 2017, from 2016 until now, every year we succeeded to repatriate it from the state's objects. So this is 5 objects we repatriated in 2016 with the customs. They stopped when we had to inform us if it's legal or illegal left Egypt. This is the head of and 2 hands of different mummies. It has a good story. One American man who was visiting Egypt in 1927, and he bought these 3 objects with $1, and he takes them there in 1927 until 2017. And I was there in the States and started to appeared in New York market. And I talked with the authorities there. I told them it's stolen from Egypt, and they bring the paper. And I told them, no, this man here was not a dealer at that time, and he gave it to you with fake paper. And we succeeded to repatriate it back in 2018. And National Geographic, they had a nice movie about how Egypt succeeded to repatriate these 3 objects back to Egypt. This is what we call the human remains. It's ethically, they have to bring back to their own country. All human remains, not only Egyptian, all human remains for code of ethics for museums that must be back to our own country. From sites, you know the temple of Hatshepsut, I think this is the famous temple. We missing 2 pieces from it, and we succeeded to repatriate this piece from London 2017, and the other piece we repatriated just last year from London too. And this piece also was stolen from Saqqara, and we repatriated in 2017, and now it's in Egyptian Museum at Cairo. This is also it's a good story about, this is the skeleton of what we call the skeleton of Nazlet Khater. This is the first man lives in Egypt, and it dates back to 36,000 BC. And it was in Belgium, and we repatriated back, and this is the first object. You can, when you go to visit National Museum of Civilization in Egypt, you can see this is the first object for the first man lives in Egypt at the time. And after 2017, we repatriated the hand axe, which he used it in his tomb with them, and you can see that both of them, they display it now. It's a message, because, you know, we didn't repatriate object to store rooms, to put in the store or to hide. We repatriated object to put it in display, to let other people see and know. I will be quick. Yeah, okay. This is also nine objects from France. While the president, our president visited France in 2018, we repatriated this 9 objects. And also this is the mask from Amman, 440 objects from United Arab Emirates. This is from Cyprus, it was 14 objects. And this is from Italy. Just give me 1 minute to talk about this because this is a very important case and it's still ongoing until now. This is the golden coffin which was displayed in Metropolitan Museum, and they bought it with about almost $5 million from a French dealer, but we succeeded after 2 years of investigation with them to repatriate it back to Egypt and displayed now in Nemek. You can see this is the Minister of Antiquities and Dealer, and this is the Ambassador of United States. We are on all this media when we succeeded to repatriate it back to Egypt. Also, we repatriated 450 objects from United Arab Emirates. Here, this is from Facebook. And this is also from, I think, Facebook too, from Italy. This is 5,000 objects. It was displayed in Bible Museum in the United States, and we succeeded last year, 2021. All Egyptian objects in this museum, we succeeded to repatriate it back to Egypt. This is some of them. This is also was displayed in Facebook. And Canada, this is 4 pieces from Germany. And this is 115 objects from France. 3 from London. This is from Israel, 95 objects last year. This is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Egyptian Minister of Foreign Affairs. From Switzerland. This is the last 2 objects repatriated from Belgium. This is the last case we succeeded to repatriate from Metropolitan Museum, 6 objects. You can see how they look very nice. The last object, we can see how we repatriated back, and this is it's called the Green Coffin from Houston Museum. Here I want to before I finish my talk, I know it takes more time, I'm sorry. We succeeded to repatriate about 29,398 objects from 2011 till now. I think this is a good number to achieve in very short time with all circumstances we have. Thank you so much for everything, and I'm sorry if I take more time. Shukran. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharpen, for telling us about the repatriation process in Egypt. And it's really good to hear successful stories about repatriation. With a challenging topic like this, it can be quite depressing and discouraging to talk about repatriation when it doesn't work, but you've given us some really inspiring, successful examples, so thank you very much. We're going to move now from the Middle East and North Africa to West Africa to Côte d'Ivoire. And the next speaker is Honoré Kwadjo Kwasi, the Deputy Director General of the National Higher Institute of Arts from the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire. And he's going to talk to us about the repatriation of the Ivorian talking drum, the Gigi Oyokwe. Honoré.
I'm so glad Egypt is so successful in repatriating everything. So when I go back home, I will just let my minister in charge of culture that we have a reference person here who could help us bring also some of our art in France. It's my pleasure to participate in this global talk on museum, decolonization, and restitution. And before any other work, I just want to thank ICOM family for allowing me to share with you a restitution case study. My presentations articulate the specific case of a talking drum called Gigi Ayokwe from Ivory Coast and from my own community. I explore the real challenges related to the process of restitution of the drum specifically and of cultural art in general. To make sure that I give every detailed information about it, I'm going to read my notes. So my presentation is about 4 different parts. I was just talking about the context of repatriation. I will introduce the talking drum in details, and I will talk about the pre-reservation scheduled activities, and I will end by talking about challenges and conditions for successful restitution. So, introduction, I will just come back to, other main ideas like the repatriation of African cultural property for European-owned collection to their country of origin, originating from the French president's address in November 2017 in Burkina Faso, is a strong opportunity for African nations like Cote d'Ivoire to recover our collective identity and memory. The context now. Since the Gigi Ayokwe was taken away from them, the Owen community never stopped claiming their ownership. And we have different books, national books about it. The need to meet, reunite, and reconstruct history has become increasingly persistent among the new dispersed members of community. The aspirations the books published on African cultural art and the recent announcement by President Macron. This is a picture of our talking drum, you can see. The talking drum is the first object claimed out of a list of 148 cultural arts, all held in the collection of Quai Branly museums in Paris. Allow me to tell a short story about the drum, and you will understand why the colonists took it away. French colonists were looking for workers to build the railroad line in the colony. What happened is that every time the white men came to the area, no one was to be found. The area was deserted because of the drum. The instrument was used to communicate, to sound the alarm that the colonist was about to arrive. The colonists realized the drum was the informer, and then, of course, they take it away. A few detailed information about the drum. It was taken away from local communities in 1916. It weighs 430 kilos and is 3.5 meters long, as you can see. It has an acoustic range of more than 20 kilometers. It is a sacred artifact that requires timely rituals. As previously mentioned, it is a communication instrument that provides coded message. It means that if you are not initiated, of course, you cannot see the message that is being conveyed by the drum. It has also various sources. It is a source of cohesion among community members. It also protects the members against any kind of attack. It functions as a religious institution because we have initiates and we have rules to be respected. We have ritual ceremony to be performed. And it also allows the transmission of knowledge. This is an image of a picture of my community members. They're called the Bijo. So let's move now to the activities that we scheduled for the return of our drum. We did have a range of different activities meant to prepare the reception of the drum, Gigi Ayokwe, as you can see. The first activity was our government to set up a national committee composed of museum professionals, scholars, academics, and researchers, all right, to think about how to put out the good method that will allow the artifact to come back home. And we have also the official request, request of the drum by the Ivorian Ministry in charge of culture through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We also have regional actions like through ECOWAS, and the head of state met in Benin in 2018. They made a joint declaration and adopted the regional policy and 1923 action plans on the return of African art to the countries of origin. October 2022, the National Committee, the Ministry of Culture and staff met the local Pidgin community to favor the involvement of community and tradition to the ongoing repatriation process. Since the drum underwent different damages, it has been decided that before it's come back home, it needs to be restored. And before this, a ceremony is needed. This is a picture of the ceremony held in Paris. And the objective of ritual ceremony is to allow people who are not initiated to get in touch with the drum and easily perform the restoration. In November 22, it was over. The drum is now restored by a French team specialist of artifact restoration. And again, in December 22, a national conservation was held in Abidjan to deepen reflection on restitution. The last point, in fact, this is the school I used to work on. It is a National School of Art. And we are planning to organize a sub-regional colloquium on restitution with a particular focus on legal issues. In order for the restitution of the drum to be a successful activity, some challenges need to be met courageously. And we have a range of different challenges that are also mentioned. From our own point of view, there's no real regional collaboration about the return. I'm talking about the states belonging to ECOWAS organization. As you know, very recently, Benin and Senegal have some of the objects back from France. And normally speaking, we are all from ECOWAS, and I think it's better for us to organize to make sure that we have also a common point of view that we present to France to make sure that we have our object back. But Côte d'Ivoire is still waiting for its drum. It's not over yet, but we're just fighting for that. The other point is much remains to be done because our museum that we call Musée de Civilisation French is also waiting to be renovated. During the Civil War in 2010, the museum has been broken by people, and some of the objects have been taken away. So we need absolutely to make sure that it's a secure place for artifacts. In my country also, we do have the Kings and Traditional Heads organization. For the time being, this organization is not part of the process, and it is quite a regrettable activity because we need them to come and give their point of view about how to proceed, because we cannot take our art apart unless our traditional heads also give a point of view. Training of restoration specialists is required. As I said, those who restore our drum were all French people. It means that we need also to have in our programs, in our institute, a program that will also train people to be specialists in restoration. The other point is France has not yet ratified the Convention of June 1995. That is a legal instrument to support and guide restitution. That's a very contradiction to my point of view because the president recently declared that objects should be returned to their country of origin, but this convention has not been ratified, so sometimes we are just, what are they talking about? Are they really serious about talking about the return of, or are they joking? We try to see. ICOM has enacted a code of ethics, like a reference document for all members of museums, and it's also regretful that we don't have in Côte d'Ivoire a national code of ethics. Just a few years ago, if someone enters maybe the museum and maybe is about to steal maybe enough, you're going to just pay something that is not expensive. So we need to punish people who don't want to respect art, the spirit, and also the meanings and the functions. Legal issues also are, from a point of view, challenges, because objects in Cape Brownlee Museum's collection are considered French properties that are totally inalienable. This means that most of our art in French collection, if we want to follow strictly the law, we cannot take them away because they are French properties. In this case, I was very happy to hear my friend from Egypt talking about memorandum. We're going to see also how to use diplomacy, okay, to go and reach the objective. The other point is our museum in Côte d'Ivoire functions as a central directorate with only an operating budget. The problem is that there's no investment budget that will help the museum to organize, different activities and also support self-funding. Other challenges, excuse me. Let's put here, it doesn't matter. Okay. Let's go to the conclusion. The restitution of African cultural art to their native land remains an act of highly historical, anthropological, and social significance. Reappropriation of cultural objects deserve to be refought in light of the long years spent in French museum. Restitution cannot do without the question of regarding the role of museum institution as well as their mission. Restitution remains a complex issue that should not be settled to the detriment of Africa and for the legitimate aspiration of the continent's people who are now determined to achieve social cohesion around the landmark of cultural objects. For African states, the time has come for commitment and constructive, measured, and federative discourse on the return of looted objects for sub-regional integration, but also for reinforcement of living together, which national museums now invested with new responsibilities shall try to achieve. And we hope that in the coming days, our drum will be back home and we'll celebrate with our communities, the joy to join our community, our tradition, and to make sure that cohesion that was the common denominator among different countries and different villages of the community is back, and that we can continually meet and talk about our past and our tradition. Thank you.
Thank you, Honoré. That was a really good example of how objects' meanings are related to communities and to their social context, and return of objects means the revitalisation of those cultural traditions, and you can't do that repatriation necessarily without the community being involved. So that was a really good case study. Thank you very much. We move now to Australia and to the capital city, Canberra, where Michael Pickering has worked for many years as a repatriation practitioner. He's an honorary associate professor in the Department of Heritage and Museum Studies at the Australian National University and an independent researcher, and he's going to be talking about the return of ancestral remains. Michael.
Thank you for that, and thank you to the organisers and to the audience for their patience. Australia has been carrying out the repatriations of ancestral human remains and secret sacred objects to Australian Indigenous communities for over 30 years. Over this time, it is conservatively estimated that the remains of approximately 2,500 individuals have been returned back to community ownership and control. It must be stated that the repatriation movement in Australia is the outcome of years of effort by Indigenous activists and advocates. The commitments by Australian governments and collecting institutions is an informed response to this advocacy. The philosophies, policies and processes for repatriation of Australian Indigenous ancestral remains have become refined and relatively efficient. Australian museums and other Indigenous heritage agencies have, through research and experience and full community engagement, encountered and dealt with the majority of issues likely to confront other agencies engaging in the repatriation of ancestral remains, both domestically and internationally. Particularly in the areas of project governance, where practices and supporting rationales have been developed to ensure that the appropriate communities are identified, engaged and protected, while at the same time the engaging agency is also protected. Many of the debates, experiences and outcomes have been reported in scholarly and popular media, and many are easily available online or through direct contacts with repatriation managers. How do I get the thing? Okay, this image shows some of the major Australian publications on repatriation of Indigenous ancestral remains. I will point out the one at the end by me that is available free to download on the National Museum of Australia website. Thus, Australian repatriation experiences offer resources for the world. Similarly, there are engagements elsewhere in the world that largely go unreported in accessible forms. In some ways, this paper is a plea for people to share their experiences, positive and negative, that will inform repatriation practitioners. It might be argued that Australia's experiences in repatriation are specific to the Australian context, unique due to Australia's remote location, the cultural characteristics of the hundreds of Indigenous cultures that occupy it, and its histories. There have also been international museum colleagues who have denied that their nations lack any Indigenous people, yet they refer to folk minorities, typically defined by their territorial locations and unique cultural characteristics. In their eyes, this makes the Australian experience irrelevant to their situation. However, the terms Indigenous and folk minority are, when scrutinised, nearly synonymous, referring to small, discrete, self-identifying cultural groups. It is within this broader context that the Australian experience in repatriation is immediately relevant to informing international debates and the development of repatriation processes. The majority of Australia's repatriation events have been unproblematic, with well-provenance remains being returned to Indigenous communities with no issue. Such events are usually a positive experience for the communities, the repatriation agencies, and through supportive media coverage. The wider Australian community has also supported repatriation. Repatriations are typically seen as good news stories by the public, generally due to the empathy they share over the principle of respect for the dead, regardless of cultural origins. This is just some clips from various media coverage of repatriation of remains. This image shows some of the events where repatriated remains are being returned and reburied. These come from across Australia. It is easy to concentrate attention on the numerous success stories in Australian Indigenous repatriations. And this is often a typical trade show approach, common to many Australian conferences and media releases, where museums and government agencies stand up and boast about what a good job they're doing. There's no doubt we've learnt a lot about how to do things through other people's success stories. However, we can also learn a lot in both scholarly and practical terms through interrogating the less positive issues that may arise in the repatriation process. Such issues are often concealed, sometimes through a desire to avoid embarrassment in front of the boss, but more often to avoid unintentionally arming those opposed to repatriation, who would weaponise negative events in order to prevent or delay a repatriation activity. Examples of such issues include those who argue that more intensive science-based provenancing work needs to be done based on a rare episode of poor historical or scientific provenancing, or those who would argue that there are internal community disputes over appropriate authority that must be resolved before remains are returned, often based on a dissenting minority voice in the Indigenous community. There are those who argue biological affiliation to remains is more important than cultural affiliation, despite this being clearly dismissed through numerous legal and scholarly investigations into cultural identity and authority. Often these objections are concealed under the umbrella statement of, "We want to do the right thing." Finally, there are those who claim the return of remains will open the floodgates to claims on other parts of their collections. This has not happened in Australia, nor has it happened in those international institutions that have decided to return Australian remains. So despite the numerous successes, there are also day-to-day issues with repatriating remains in Australia. I would identify the silencing of the Indigenous activists and advocates through greater government agency interference in repatriation activities, especially internationally. There are gaps in communication between the various repatriating agencies, such as museums, heritage agencies, government offices and universities. There is competition between agencies for control of sectors of repatriation activities, more to ensure their own survival than to better serve Indigenous communities. There are ageing and inflexible grant processes that do not accommodate the costs or timeframes of repatriation activities. There is poor post-return government support for appropriate cultural activities needed for respectful reburials. There are other issues, largely administrative, that interfere with, but do not prevent successful repatriations. But let's accept that, let's face it, that's business as usual for most organisations. Positive and negative experiences both provide important learning and knowledge resources. Indeed, how difficulties, both intellectual and practical, have been approached, moderated and resolved is probably more valuable to repatriation studies than simple reports of uncomplicated returns. Despite the issues that can occasionally arise, much has been achieved through the process of repatriation. Of course, the most significant outcome is the unconditional return of ancestral remains to Australian Indigenous communities. These remains were typically acquired by or for Western collecting agencies through illegal and immoral acts such as grave robbing, the mutilation of people killed in colonial conflicts, dissection of Indigenous people who died in hospitals, asylums and prisons without appropriate consent, and acquisition through purchase or gift in a situation where the relationship between the Indigenous so-called seller or donor and the acquirer was far from equal. Their return is an act of restorative justice. The general sentiments, as stated in the Australian Government's policy on Indigenous repatriation, acknowledge the often disgraceful circumstances of collecting and are shared by state and territory governments and by the public collecting institutions and heritage agencies under their jurisdiction. These can be summarised as acknowledgements that Australian Indigenous people have the right to the repatriation of their ancestors' remains. The original taking of remains was an act of injustice. Repatriation is a mechanism for healing injustice in Australian society. The return of ancestral remains empowers Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to meet their cultural obligations and contribute to the wider Australian society. The concept of repatriation being an act addressing past injustices needs little explanation. However, the concept of assisting in healing is less clear. To some, it might seem like mere rhetoric. It is, however, very real in the cultural worlds of Indigenous Australians and can be demonstrated in real outcomes. When remains are returned to their homelands and culturally authorised descendants It is believed that their spirit has also been laid to rest. Lands that were once considered sick because of the removal of the remains are now healed, and reuse of the resources of the land can now commence. Victims of the forced removal of children from their parents and lands in the past have recounted how being able to participate in the reburial of remains has made them feel that they too have truly come home. Elders are recognised as having increased authority through achieving returns and managing the culturally appropriate final disposition of remains. Young people are trained and better culturally empowered through their participation in repatriation activities. Improvements in the social, physical and mental well-being of communities do occur and are observable. The explicit and formal acknowledgements by Australian governments at all levels that repatriation assists healing is thus an important one. In addition, there have been other positive outcomes. In a number of cases, an Australian collecting institution's repatriation commitments and activities has resulted in greater social issues-based engagements rather than relatively simple, sterilised, exhibition-oriented projects. This has led to increased trust between the collecting institutions and Indigenous communities, though this trust must be maintained. There are increasing research partnerships between scholars and practitioners of repatriation and those communities that have had remains returned. These partnerships provide valuable new knowledge that not only informs museum practice, but also provokes consideration as to future directions in museum, academic and Indigenous interests. Many of the protocols and resources developed in the repatriation of ancestral remains are relevant to those processes that should be applied not only in the repatriation discussions of other objects and materials, but with engagements with Indigenous communities on other museum collection related matters. One significant example of repatriation-related research emerging from such partnerships is the Return, Reconcile and Renew project, which I've been involved with, carried out in partnership with 3 Indigenous cultural blocks, several domestic and international universities and affiliates, a museum and a major Indigenous representative agency. This research provides resources for Indigenous and non-Indigenous researchers alike, with a strong focus on providing information to Australian Indigenous communities seeking information about the histories of their own misappropriated ancestors. Initially working with the 3 community partners, the project serves as a model for information management and access that can be applied to other communities seeking information on the whereabouts of their ancestors, and is growing in content. The website is also a valuable resource for guidance on governance in repatriation projects. So this is just a clip of one of the website pages and links to various Indigenous representatives who talk about their experiences. And this is a link to some of the searchable criteria on the website, on the public pages of the website. There are non-public pages which only community members can access. There are also other offshoot studies. Through repatriation-stimulated engagements, we're also acquiring new knowledge on contemporary Indigenous societies and their perspectives on the changes in their cultures and histories over time since colonisation. We must remember that foreign societies are not locked in time or space, and the legitimate social changes they experience are part of the modern human story, deserving of consideration by progressive museums. We have greater understanding of the significance of cultural heritage to contemporary Australian and Indigenous people. We better understand the legitimacy of cultural change over time. We have better appreciation of the impacts of cultural beliefs on Indigenous engagements with sensitive collection materials, including human remains, sacred objects and secular materials. Australia's repatriation directions have also benefited from federal and state laws, determinations and commitments regarding Indigenous social and property rights. one very positive outcome of the legal testing and recognition of Indigenous rights through such things as land rights legislation, native title, and heritage legislation is that mechanisms and criteria for affiliation to lands, beliefs, community identity and culture have been tested and expanded through various legal processes, usually unrelated to repatriation. These expanded criteria have been objectively proven and can be translated to issues of repatriation. In particular, the fact that cultural criteria are as legitimate as biological criteria in assigning rights to ancestral remains and other cultural heritage. These precedents can inform international repatriation research, particularly in the areas of how identity and affiliation are defined and how rights may persist in ancestral remains and cultural heritage. The legal testing of rights challenges the opinions of those who oppose repatriation on the basis that it is driven by sentiment, emotion, politics of convenience, or irrational spiritual beliefs. This is another image of handovers and reburials of repatriated remains in various parts of Australia. Now I turn to decolonisation and repatriation. The decolonisation of museums and the repatriation of remains and cultural materials has become almost synonymous. In many public discussions, repatriation is represented as the mandatory measure of success for a museum's decolonisation. However, decolonisation starts with a changing institutional culture, not just with the decision to repatriate. As noted at the beginning, Australian museums have been repatriating ancestral remains for over 30 years, long before decolonisation became the latest buzzword. Repatriations were occurring because they were eventually considered the right thing to do. Retrospectively, decolonisation of the museums was inherent in these change philosophies, but was not the explicit and primary motivator. The increasing profile of decolonisation debates suggests that museums are engaging more with both decolonisation and, by default, repatriation. Unfortunately, in Australia, this is not always the case. Despite some institutional claims of world leadership in philosophy and practice, it is usually the case that the repatriation practitioners in Australian museums are few and relatively isolated, typically less than 1% of the total staffing. They are highly motivated and they do their best, but in many ways their work and the philosophies behind their work is concealed from the rest of the institution. In my own 25 years of experience working in major Australian museums, decolonisation and repatriation were not topics introduced as part of a general staff training or discussed on the museum floor. It did not affect the philosophical, theoretical and practice directions of the finance staff, the visitor services staff, facilities managers, public programs, marketing or administrative staff, amongst others. Many museums advertise their progressiveness with statements about their engagements with decolonisation or repatriation. New policies and guidelines promising improved recognition of the rights of Indigenous peoples in the management and use of collections are released with much fanfare. However, often these policies and statements progress no further than the nearest highly decorated website or glossy policy document. An internal investigation of how these promises are practically implemented can be disappointing. The promises rarely penetrate the museum to inform and guide the practices of staff, and they rarely lead to a real change in the institutional culture. The repatriation philosophies, policies and activities of an institution need to be communicated more broadly to both all staff and to the public on a continuing basis, not just when it's convenient to make a media boast. Consideration of the decolonising and repatriation debates needs to engage all museum staff. This does not mean staff having to take sides in the debates. It does mean being aware and informed of the debates that are affecting the industry in which they choose to work. To conclude, the experiences and evolving philosophies and practices of Australian museums in repatriation of ancestral remains can inform other international museums and heritage agencies and policies and practices. the experiences and evolving philosophies and practices of international museums in repatriation of ancestral remains and other cultural materials can similarly inform Australian museums and heritage agencies in their policies and practices. International repatriation experiences can inform the decolonisation debate. The decolonisation debate can inform repatriation practices. And appreciation of, if not a wholehearted support for, the issues involved in repatriation and decolonisation debates must be shared by the entire museums community, not just by small groups of specialists. And that's where I'll conclude, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. A really interesting presentation facing the challenges and the issues and the problems involved with repatriation, but also really important points there, I think, about some of the outcomes in terms of health and well-being in communities, and not just for museums and related institutions. It's been a long afternoon, everyone, but we're going to have one more pre-recorded presentation, and then we're going to have a break before we come back for the panel and the final session with Carol. So we're going to have a presentation now online from Glasgow in Scotland. Duncan Dornan, who's Head of Museums and Collections at Glasgow Life, is going to talk to us about Glasgow Museum's repatriation of objects to India.
My name is Duncan Dornan. I'm Head of Museums and Collections for Glasgow Life. I'm talking to you today about the recent repatriation which we've approved of objects taken from India and being returned to the Archaeological Survey of India. In 2022, Glasgow City Council's City Administration Committee approved repatriation of 51 objects to 3 communities. 19 objects to be returned to Nigeria, which were taken as part of the punitive raid on Benin City in 1897. 25 objects to be returned to the Lakota community. Some of these objects were taken from the Mundidi massacre site following the battle there in 1890, whilst others were personal items belonging to named ancestors or ceremonial artefacts taken from the community. And 7 items to be returned to the ownership of the Archaeological Survey of India. 6 of these artefacts were stolen from temples and shrines in different states in northern India during the 19th century, while the 7th item was illegally purchased as a result of theft from the owner. All 7 objects had been gifted to Glasgow and formed part of the Museum Services collection. Whilst this decision generated substantial press interest, the processed Jews was in fact first developed in Glasgow in the late 1990s. In the mid-1990s, a claim had come from the Lakota community for a number of objects held in Glasgow's collections. This claim was initially rejected, but was followed up by a further request for a single item, the ghost shirt. This repatriation request was ultimately approved in 1998. To support this process, a set of criteria were developed at the time. These set out the requirement to confirm the moral and legal authority of the claimant, the requirement to confirm the identity of the object in question, and also indication of the future care of the object as being suitable. The fundamental approach was applied to the 22 repatriation requests, including that from India, though the methodology was adapted as a result of experience. The change made specifically removed the item relating to the future care of the objects. The rationale for this was that if an object is deemed to be another community's property, then its future use is entirely their business and it should not influence the decision-making process. It is most important to emphasise that the formal assessment of a repatriation claim, and indeed the claim itself, most effectively come as a result of a strong relationship of trust between the Museum Service and the community representatives making the claim. Given the history of objects in question, it may take time for the Museum Service to establish credibility. Discussions held within a trusting and respectful atmosphere are essential to determining the best outcome for the objects and for the community. We must recognise that in some cases, physical return of an object may not be the desired course, and museum services must respect the wishes of those from whom objects were taken. In the case of the Indian objects, ahead of the formal request for repatriation, curatorial research was completed, working with partners in India to confirm the provenance of the objects in question. Once both parties were satisfied about the identification of the items, a repatriation request was submitted, which was duly approved by the City Council. The next step in this process, ahead of the physical transfer of objects, was to sign a transfer of title document. In addition to being an essential legal step, this provided an opportunity for a public ceremony to recognise the history of the objects and to signify a new relationship of equals between both communities. Given the high level of interest in the repatriation in the UK, there was some concern about the public reaction, which in the event was extremely positive. Many Glasgow citizens of Indian heritage were invited to the ceremony to sign the transfer of title and express pride in the steps taken by their city to right historic wrongs and in the equal relationship which this facilitated and pointed to. The signing ceremony around the transfer of title can provide insight into the human and emotional aspects of the process, which is often lost in the business of administration. This most recent event highlighted the care required in managing such events, particularly as the element of the process which is most public. It is important that the structures and hierarchies, which may be slightly different in different communities and different societies, are adequately recognised on both sides and that the process is able to proceed with dignity. The physical move of the objects took place several weeks later, being subject to the normal hurdles of parking and customs controls typical of the movement of museum objects. In this instance, we know that a new gallery space is being created to exhibit these objects in Delhi, which we expect to be ready by 2024. In looking back on this experience, we can certainly say that it fostered new and positive relationships, and it demonstrated that the retention of wrongfully removed objects clearly erects barriers of which we may be unaware. The new and more egalitarian relationship is really essential to Glasgow, and I would suggest to other similar museum services, establishing a more positive and more productive relationship with other services in other countries. And we certainly look forward to moving the other two repatriations forward in a similar vein. Thank you very much.
Niminha, a very, very interesting, diverse and rich final session here at our seminar today, and we have three of the speakers from our panel here on stage, and Duncan is online with us. Can you hear us there, Duncan?
Yes, I can, thank you.
Thank you, Duncan, for beaming in, and yeah, I hope it's not an uncivilized time of the day there in Scotland. So we have here Sharpen, Michael and Honore on stage, Duncan online, and we have possibly some questions from the floor and some online questions, but I have a leading question for each of you, picking up on the plea that Michael made in his presentation for people to share their experiences of repatriation practice. So we've had each of you talking about examples and case studies of repatriation and restitution in different parts of the world. Listening to each other, what have you learned from each other, from repatriation in different countries today? And are there any questions or comments that you would make of each other? Duncan, perhaps we could start with you. What did you take away from today's session? And I guess in general, learning from other repatriation practitioners.
I think the thing which struck me is the diversity of approach and practice in relation to repatriation, and the emphasis is something we I think conscious of, that it's absolutely not one size fits all, and this is a very much an individual process driven by the circumstances around the objects and by the aspirations of the source communities. And I think what's really struck me is the diversity of approaches and circumstances that people have been speaking of today.
That's really interesting, and I think it's a point that Sharpen made in his presentation about a case-by-case basis for approaching repatriation.
For me, I think I learned even from my cases. So each case, it gives us a lesson. So I learned from my colleagues, from each word they said, from each case. So I think it's very important if we are listening for each other, sharing our experience, listening for the people, listening for the other partner, I mean museums and customs people. So it will let us know more. So it's exactly they collect all information and they give it to you in one seminar like we had. So this is what I learned it from today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honoré, for you, what have you learned today?
Thank you. I think there's much to be learned because, as my colleague from Egypt was saying, most of our Ivorians art are to be found in French collections, Paris. And unfortunately, when he was talking about presenting his presentation, most of the art, some of them have been taken from France. So for me, it's very important to also listen to what he's talking about, so that we can use also some of his methods that we can use in my country also to help our art get back home. I was especially interested when he was talking about memorandum of agreement, and I think this is one of very important points, because for this art, I think in ECOWAS we have two groups. Some countries wanted immediate and unconditional restitution, and others want to use diplomacy to have them back. And I think diplomacy way can be explored, and when I listen to my colleague, I think I have learned to learn, and then when I get back home, I will help us, my country, to work so that we can have our work back. Thank you.
I was struck by that too, actually, the similarity between both of your approaches, in that there were approaches that were more direct and legalistic, and then approaches that were more indirect and persuasive. And it seems sometimes to me, I think thinking from a Pacific point of view, that sometimes the indirect approach can be more effective. If people are very direct, sometimes the shutters can come down and there's resistance or barriers to repatriation. One of the issues, I think, in the academic literature about repatriation, and this came up yesterday, is that sometimes the debates go round and round in circles. Someone yesterday referred to the sort of carousel of academic talk and debate, and there's a shortage of writing and research by repatriation practitioners themselves. Michael, what have you learnt from today?
I've learnt that I'm not alone. I mentioned in my talk about these are not discussions that are had on the museum floor. It was very hard to have a discussion on repatriation apart from a very, very small group of external colleagues. But within the museum, it was usually me. So what I've heard from everybody, issues that I thought, is it just me? They've all identified. I'm not alone, and I was really pleased to hear those experiences. And I showed a link to a website that I've been working on, and I was really pleased to see other websites being shown. And as soon as they were shown, I have, while I've been sitting down there, texted those links to my colleagues in Canberra, who are all now very excited to know that this information is out there. And I think, I'm certainly hungry for this information, and I can disseminate it, and so can all of us. So, learning I'm not alone, and I'm not as mad as I thought I was. Thank you.
And now there are four of you here today. It's a club. How important is it, do you think, for repatriation practitioners to form a network to support one another and learn from each other's experiences? Have any of you got thoughts about the importance of networking and working together globally as well as locally and regionally?
It's essential. As I mentioned, we've had in Australia lots and lots of experiences. We've had problems, and we've solved those problems. I'm working with partners in Germany and in Japan and in Taiwan who want advice as to how to proceed. And they're coming to me with problems that we basically solved 15 years ago not solved 100%, but we had the experience and we can share that experience, and that helps fast track people's repatriation activities. And it's knowing that there are policies out there that and procedures and practices that people can draw upon when in preparing their own policies.
And Duncan, what about you in Glasgow? Have you learned from other practitioners, other networks, other institutions, locally and globally?
Yes, absolutely. There's a very strong network of partners across the UK, institutions who are involved in repatriation, and I think that really informs our practice, and equally our experiences help to inform them, and I think that's really important to avoid repeating mistakes, and also I think to build institutional confidence so that institutions can engage with conversations and progress with repatriation, feeling that they're following best practice, and they have the support of the sector. So I think it's vitally important we do that, as it's important that we build strong, open, honest relationships with communities who are seeking repatriations to ensure the process is as effective as possible for all parties.
Of course, there are commonalities and similarities, but there are also differences, and each of you talked about the specificities, the unique conditions in which you're working. What advice would you give if someone came to you asking for advice about how to do repatriation in your particular city, country, region? What advice would you give them about how to go about doing repatriation? Duncan, can we start with you?
Our key piece of advice, without doubt, would be to spend time to build relationships with the people whose objects are to be returned, and that's really essential, both to ensure that the process respects their wishes, to ensure that it runs smoothly, and to ensure that the correct outcome for the object is identified. And in our experience, time spent doing that allows us to be a much more effective experience for all.
Building relationships is a really good lesson. Sharpen, what would be your advice to someone asking about this?
I think my advice for everyone working, not only for repatriation, that first build your building capacity, training, take good experience before you start. When you start to be strong, it's better than you strong weak and takes time to be strong, and you will lose many cases. So first, work for your team, train them, give them good experience, and then I think you will start in a good way.
Good advice, thank you. Michael, your tips for repatriation?
The first thing I'd do would say download my book. It is free, it's online, and you can do it now while you're sitting here. Because it's really hard to say what you want to say in 15 minutes. So that was why I wrote a book about repatriation practice in Australia. It's how to do it. But really, the crux of it all is mutual respect between the participating partners, listening to the claimant, and you don't have to agree with them, but you do have to appreciate what their position is and try and understand how they see it. There's the old story of, it's not whether I believe what they're saying, it's whether I believe that they believe what they're saying. And that's, when you get to the heart of it, I think that's crucial. And I've known so many international agencies who are opposed to repatriation. As soon as they have met and spoken to the claimant on their home country or in a non-media environment, they've just been transformed. And both sides have experienced a greater trust in the other. So communication and respect.
And particularly face-to-face dialogue.
Absolutely, yeah.
Honoré.
Thank you. I think I also have some advices if someone comes to ask me, how to carry on a successful restitution of artifact. In our system, I think already talk about training of people, and we also have some facilities like infrastructure that will receive the art to come back home. And we also have the legal aspect to be strictly observed, because if in national law we do not have any code of ethics that is strongly punishing people, then the art will come back home, but it won't be, a successful return. So we have to make sure that, we have a secure legal system. We train people also, and we have appropriate facilities to respond to it. And the other one is, in the process of returning actors, they have to make sure that also diplomacy is very important, use my point of view, because immediate and unconditional restitution, from my point of view, is not quite the best way. But we use diplomacy and collaboration that will help to have a more successful and secure restitution.
Something to add, Chaplain?
Yeah, I want to add something because we are talking with the audience now. Most of them, they are young generation and students. So I think my advice for me and for them first, please preserve your heritage in your country, because if it go outside of your country, it will be very difficult to repatriate it back. So it's better to keep it in your country. You're still young, to learn how to preserve heritage in your country better than you asking about them when they go outside. It's very difficult to repatriate, by the way. It's not that easy like you can see in presentation. It takes lots of time and lots of energy, and I became white hair because I work in this field. So please keep your eye on your heritage and keep it in your site. Thank you.
Speaking of students and others in the audience learning from this session, let's open questions up now to the audience. I don't know whether we have any questions online, but there's a question right here from the Philippines.
I will repeat my question from this morning. This morning, most of the speakers used the term restitution, and this afternoon, most of you used repatriation. So for the cultural heritage students, maybe you could clarify, are they interchangeable, or, I mean, in your context, perhaps restitution is something else, like a process? So maybe you can answer.
Good question, thank you. Who would like to tackle that first? Maybe each of you. Honoré.
Nobody wants to start. I'm going to start. All right. From my own point of view, I think restitution has more to do with the process, my point of view. And when I think about the term repatriation, let me give you an example that is not firstly for the arts, but if someone, for example, is living in French, someone is living in a country and he has an irregular status, then the government can decide to repatriate him. I mean, it's like you just take him back home without any procedure, right? But restitution has to do with, different, procedure, different steps, and then it's what we're talking about, all right? So if you want to, or have to be restituted, it means what? That you have a method, you have a kind of methodology that you try to respect, all right? You start by going to meet maybe the whole country and make sure that you have everything ready in your own country. I mean, the different stages. And the final step is to have the art back. So my own point of view, restitution have to respect both the different stages, while repatriation is like more about like to take it direct back home, is what I think.
For my opinion, I think if I understand the questions clearly, restitution is different than repatriation, for my opinion. Restitution, it's like if some museum have any object and he saw that it's not illegal and send it back to the site, to the original country. But repatriation, it comes from you have to make your claim and you're working. So I think repatriation is more global than restitution. Restitution, it's I'm just waiting to other people, to other countries to give me what they have. But repatriation, it's your right, and you have to fight against your right. This is what I believe.
Thanks, Chaplain. Duncan, would you like to come in here?
This is an interesting question. Our definitions would be rather different. So we would consider repatriation to be return of an object to a nation, to a political entity, where restitution is rather more specific to a community and a group of individuals. So in our context, we define it rather differently about that, the recipient, rather than necessarily the nature of the process. So it's interesting that there's a diversity of thought on this point. That's quite fascinating.
Thanks, Duncan. Michael?
Definitions are always great fun. I would immediately go straight to the nearest dictionary and rely on what they say, because it gets so, and that way I can blame someone else. But what I am concerned about is, for me, repatriation has to be the original. Repatriation is the return of the object or the remains and authority and responsibility for those items, whatever it is. You're giving back full control. If you send someone copies of photographs, copies of diaries, plastic scanned replicas of their marbles, that's not repatriation. That's something that may come under restitution, but repatriation is when you say, we accept that you are the culturally appropriate holders of authority and responsibility for these materials. And I do get disturbed when people talk about digital repatriation, because I would not send anyone a photograph of a skeleton and say, congratulations, I've repatriated. But we seem to be prepared to do that with other materials. So we'll provide copies, or we'll provide documents, copies of documents. So yeah, I'm a bit of a stick in the mud when it comes to definition. Thanks.
I can see people nodding. Duncan, you were nodding. Would you like to add anything?
But I think the point's well made that restitution or repatriation, ultimately it is the return of control of an object to the people who first made it or first owned it. I think anything in between, unless that's what people aspire to, is not really within the spirit of what we're trying to do.
Thank you very much. Anything to add there on that question? Any other questions there in the audience? Anyone else here? We have a couple of questions online for Sharpen about Egypt. Are you ready? I'll hand you the question as well as reading it out. Thank you for your excellent presentation about the repatriation experience of Egypt. I'm so impressed with the law enforcement organs and your efficient response to the cases about stolen Egyptian antiquities in the international art market. I have two questions concerning the administration system about Egypt in charge of the return and the restitution of cultural properties, and the latest questions. Are you ready? Question one. Yeah. I could find three names which may be the governing body of the repatriation work. First, the Repatriation of Antiquities Department. Second, Supreme Council of Antiquities. And third, Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. Could you please tell me what are the relationships among these three organs and what are their main competencies respectively?
So it's easy. Before the revolution, 2011, we was Supreme Council of Antiquities. So all antiquities with Supreme Council of Antiquities bring it to the Ministry of Culture. And after revolution, we became Ministry of Antiquities. And in 2019, we became Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. So my department, it brings to Supreme Council of Antiquities, is a part of from Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. And a related question, as you mentioned, the Antiquities Protection Law number 117 of 1983, as amended by Law number 3 of 2010, was revised twice in both 2018 and 2020. Do you have more details about the changes? Are they related to the fight against illicit trafficking and repatriation of cultural property?
Because in 2019 we have a case in Christie's about the head of Ammon. It was displayed in Christie's, and we are fighting with Christie's, and we asking other organizations to support us, but no one responds. So we would like to do something, because our Egyptian law, they make penalties for everyone in Egypt. So we add this, if anyone stolen any Egyptian object, even the crime it happened in Egypt or outside of Egypt, so it must be, he has his penalties too. So someone he cares, what can you do for someone in England? But we will do, after the result of the court, we'll send it to the Interpol to let them, he is a criminal for Egyptian antiquities. So we would to do something, even I know it's not in a good way. But what can we do? You know, some people they stolen our monuments, but they are not living in Egypt. How can I make penalties for them?
Thank you very much for that. Any last questions or comments out there? It would be nice to have some questions from one of the students. Oh, yes. Okay, one question at the back and then at the front with the Vice Chancellor.
I don't have a question, but I just want to share some comment. I agree with the Australian colleagues' comment about the digital repatriation. Digital repatriation is not a real repatriation, I agree. And I agree on that.
I'm from Iraq, and lately we had a lot of wars with, I don't know. So we had a lot of wars for some specific cities. So the monuments and the objects were lost and taken. Our country asked for these monuments, but we don't know until now where they are. Maybe they are sold in black markets or anywhere. So my question is, if we have seen them in any museum around the world, we can get it back, like, because these are from my country and it was a long time ago. But so if we see them in another country's museum, so do we have the right to ask for them and we want it back, or we have to exchange something like this?
Good question, thank you. Any suggestion?
Yeah, I can answer. I know I following with my colleagues in Iraq and Syria. They are suffering from the war, and their monuments they are stolen. You know, in Iraq from the starting from the American War and the last war, and also Syria, they lost lots of monuments. And I think UNESCO, they did a good thing. They make like a red list for monuments of Iraq and Syria, so they will not display in an auction hall for sale. But to be honest with you, I don't agree with you to put it in any museum, even in Arab countries. If you find your monuments everywhere, return it back to your country. And it will be better for any place to preserve it there. But I don't know how you can preserve it because you don't know where they are. So first you have to know where they are, and you're starting to fight to let them back. And I work with Iraqi people with Bible, with the case of Bible Museum, and we worked together, and I think they repatriated good pieces from United States last year.
Perhaps you can come and have a conversation with Sharpen afterwards and he can give you some advice. Any other final questions before we wrap up? Please join me in thanking Duncan, Honore, Michael and Sharpen for their input today. And time now for Carol.
Carol Scott 做。
Now I hand over back to Carol Scott to give us